Hi everybody.
Wow.
So, first podcast in a long time, so I need to explain. So I went to a trip in Los Angeles, which is going to be the point of the podcast today. But then after that, I was supposed to do all the recap, and I got hit with what is called vestibular neuritis, which is a problem with the eyes. So that knocked me out for the last 2 weeks. So this is why we didn't have any podcast. Long story short, Google it. It's gnarly. It's the least dangerous, most gnarly stuff I went through. Anyway, I'm still woozy from it because the left eye is incapable of balancing itself correctly. Anyway, so we are in a new house. So if you hear a static in the back, this is actually because this right here is our river. We have our cabin in the, not woods, in the jungle right here. And the river is actually running right next to us. So that's what you hear most likely in the back.
It's a lot of stuff happened in the past few weeks.
Yeah, so we'll have to do podcast on that alone. By the way, you might see monkey in the back at some point. Who knows? Maybe not. We're not talking about the Mickey News, which is like the size of squirrels. We're talking like
big monkeys.
Big monkeys that big coming in the house to steal bananas and food, but they don't like the French bulldog. So he's actually keeping them away. Go figure.
He has a function.
He has a function. He's a real dog now. So there you go.
Dog.
And you might see humongous bugs flying in and out.
Yeah. Well,
we are in the jungle, like jungle. Welcome to Brazil type.
Yeah. When we got together, we were always dreaming about having a cabin in the woods.
Well, we upgraded.
We upgraded
on the dream side. Extra. Yeah.
Which is us as well.
So there you go.
Yeah, very exciting.
Anyway, so let's talk about we have a lot to talk about on this podcast because the LA trip was 3 different things that I'm going to cover, and then I'll do podcast on each because it takes everything into a new realm. So let's start with the first part of the trip. So the first part when I got to LA is I started to work with Mike, obviously, of Divergent Fitness, right? We had a meeting with Dr. Nasser Amoudi. He's an assistant professor at UCLA and I think the head of the child psychiatry department at UCLA. He's a top psychiatrist in the US, and his main thing is is PTSD. Really, you have to understand what PTSD means today. It's not what we used to call PTSD, which was mostly for military people. It's anything relating to long-lasting trauma. So now PTSD pretty much incorporates like panic attacks, for example, all that things. He has a very interesting approach to it that in a way fits very much the Strongfit principle, and this is why we started working together. So how did we get in touch? So Dr. Nasser's daughter is autistic and started to train with Mike. And then he saw tremendous progress out of her that he could not get out of his own field, which was interesting for him since he's such a high-level psychiatrist. And so he started to ask Mike why. Was he seeing the results that he was seeing? And then that's how basically the whole talk started, and eventually we meet. So he obviously deals a lot with autism as well, but his main field is PTSD. And then we started to talk some more. And the idea of that first trip was that I was going to get some of his patients, 6 of them, who are coming from a troubled background, let's see, like, so a lot of them ended up at some point or another on a suicide ward at UCLA, like, so people with a troubled background, let's call it this way, right? And the idea was I was going to put them through a session, and we were going to test the effects on the specific training session on them. So what are we going to test for? So if you remember back in the day, I've always talked about the last 5 years, parasympathetic, sympathetic, all of that. And I was questioned fairly harshly, if you all remember what I'm talking about how can you test parasympathetic, sympathetic, and everything. Well, it turns out there are many ways to do this, but as science has progressed, they have some very precise way now of doing that. So, for example, the ratio parasympathetic, sympathetic can be tested through, they have algorithms now, they say AI, but it's really an algorithm. So we can read body, you can read posture, but you can read, for example, muscle muscle of the face. Like, I don't know if you guys remember, but I talked about the vagus nerve controlling specific part of the muscle of the face. So they have algorithm that can read that now. They can read discoloration of the forehead. Remember from the burn the question. So all that stuff, algorithm now can read and establish a ratio of parasympathetic, sympathetic. There's also breathing incorporated into it. HRV is part of it. So there was a number of measures done. So how did we do the testing? So the testing started first with the students, the patients, looking at a video made with very violent and images and sounds to create a sympathetic response, right? Out of that, there would be a measurement of also the pitch of the voice, like voice modulation, iris, so pupil modulation, on top of HRV, discoloration, the algorithm, so all that stuff put together was going to test the response to stress, right? And the idea was what would happen after a session designed toward distress tolerance. So we do the sound and the video. We test their ratio at that moment. Then I would first put them in Q-1, right? Then I would make them do rope pulls, sled drags, sled sprints, depending, just to create a sympathetic response. And then after that, I would make them do some cyclical squats with the inhale on the concentric in order to bring that vagus response, that parasympathetic response. And then we would put them back on the video with images and sounds, and then measure the parasympathetic sympathetic ratio then. And we've done that with 6 patients for 3 sessions each over 5 days. And what we saw, we have already the preliminary numbers, is a ridiculous response on the ratio, for example, within each session, and the increase after 3 sessions. So I have all this logged and everything, but there was a number of things measured. It was also like how did the patient respond to the training, what they say about it, how it affected them differently, and even in day-to-day basis. So for example, as a little story, I had a client on the second, she did the 3 sessions with us, right? Not all patients did, but she did the 3. There's a bunch who did all 3. And after the second one, in between, she had a rough day. Like, it is what it is, right? And she's also heavy into OCD and stuff like that. And normally, when she starts to go that route, she will take a pill. I forget the name of the medication, but it's something to allow her to come back from those panic attack OCD moments. They kind of mixed. And after the 2 sessions, because of what I showed her through the Q-1 and the cyclical squat, she was able to wait 2 hours before she had to take the pills. So 2 hours when you're having a panic attack is an eternity. So we saw that as a tremendous beneficial factor for the training. So you have to understand that this first thing that we did with Dr. Nasser's patients is not the study we're going to do when I go next in 2 weeks in LA. This was as much to test me as it was to test the patients, honestly. I think Dr. Nasser wanted to see if the system could be used and was as good as promised. And so it turns out it was. So that's what we saw on the first round of testing, is that what I said I could do through the training, we could. Yes. But this time tested with as scientific as a method as we can do it. This was not done by me, this was done by Dr. Nasser's team, with all these people, so with AI stuff and basically whatever you all say, like, can you test it? Yes, we can. It's been done, and guess what? So far we haven't done the major study yet, but like so far what I was saying was proven to be true enough that Dr. Nasser wants to move forward with this. So why does it matter? So it's a major thing, because it means that the next trip we're going to do it on a number of people, so 10, 20, whatever. But this works so well, like Dr. Nasser wants to work with me on a number of things. And so one of the things he wants to work on, for example, is that we start to work at UCLA on treating patients, because he has a very, very interesting view of psychiatry, which is he's always look at biology, but he looks at it the same way I do, except he's a top-down person where I'm more like a bottom-up, prediction versus observation. And so, but he has something that is very much, I'll do a podcast on that, because his entire thing is a very specific branch of psychiatry that they use for PTSD, for example, which now he uses for anxiety or anything else really, which is a continuous reminder of positivity. Again, I'll explain all this, but it's kind of not a novel approach, but it's a fairly new field, if you would call that, but it's a very interesting one. And what we saw is that the way he treats the top-down issue versus the way I treat the bottom-up issue, those two together were having a very, very powerful impact. And I think that is actually the correct way of doing things, is a mix between what he does and what I do. And so we want to take that and apply it to treating patients in LA. So that means that I'm going to start going back to LA very often. And start to work with these patients as well and things like this. And on top of that, what we want to develop also out of that is the system itself, a system based on his top-down and my bottom-up, so that we can start pushing that toward psychiatry, toward actually the field of psychiatry. So that would imply grants from the government, all that stuff, and things of that nature. This is the part that interests me the most, because I was explaining to Dr. Nasser, like the movement part will require fitness professional who understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So
understand movement too.
Understand movement, right? Because his idea, well, he wants to be able to do what I did with his patients, to offer that to all psychiatrists in the US. So FDA approved, paid by insurance, all that stuff. And I was like, yeah, it's great. But I think like all the people from that field that do not understand movement, I think they underestimate how complex all that stuff is. So he wants to go at the complexity because he's developing goggles that will be able to read in real time all the testing we were doing through the apparatus that we had. So a goggle that would test again like HRV, same thing based on the algorithm to see like, the ratio, sympathetic, parasympathetic, the pupil dilation in response to stress, obviously, voice modulation, all that stuff, so that the goggle through an app could give us an idea of where the person is, so that he would explain to us how to modulate the training. Right. So basically a virtual Julian.
And you can have more certainty in where the person is and what you need to do.
What you need to be doing, how long you should. So, for example, for Q-1, right? He would tell you how long you should be doing Q-1, how hard you should go, where they are on that day, and stuff like that. That being said, I am still convinced that we will need trainers to help the psychiatrist through the movement. That one to me is obvious. So this is what interests me out of all that too, is I want to create a new field for the fitness professional of helping in that aspect toward PTSD, anxiety and all that stuff. So obviously this is exactly the Strongfit coaches.
Yes.
So this is what we're going to work this year, is developing that field, but in a way that we're going to connect directly with the medical profession. So we're not going to do it on our own, we're going to do it with the medical profession, with psychiatry. At least that's what we're shooting for, right? And then we're going to start with UCLA, and as I'm going to talk about, also the University of Indiana. We have finally connected with the other side of the equation, and so that's what we're going to move toward, is creating. So I want to create a new form of trainers, basically, that can do that field as well.
Yes.
And so we're going to have two sides to that. We're going to have the autism side and the anxiety stuff. Anxiety will be what we will call PTSD, but that will also obviously work toward anxiety and things like that. Because that's really what I worked on in those first sessions. Again, I'll do a podcast about it. Was people that were always borderline having panic attacks and how to deal with that. So that taught me a lot about how to handle anxiety in general, just to see firsthand how far panic attack can go. So so that's the first part of the trip in LA, right? So very important one, and that will impact tremendously Strongfit, because that's where we're going to go. because of the rest of the trip that I'm going to explain now. So, second part of the trip, we were working with ATA, which, by the way, we don't work with ATA anymore, but December 3rd and 4th, we're having our first autism functional exercise seminar. So the title will change, we just had to come up with one, honestly. So what is this about? So this is a seminar that I'm doing with a number of people, namely, for example, first one is Mike from Divergent Fitness. So Mike and I are starting to work together toward creating centers for the autistic population. So Mike has a gym, Divergent Fitness in LA, where he has about like 80 to 100 students, and the vast majority, 90% plus, are people on the spectrum and different neurological issues. And also some people with panic attack and problem with anxiety. So what we want to have, what we want to do is create centers. So at first we're going to start with San Diego, LA, and San Francisco. So we can start to offer a service to a very underserved population, which is autism and like major anxiety attacks, right? So we're going to create gyms there. By the way, we'll need coaches as usual. And so we've been talking about that with Mike for a while, right? And so that's coming. But on top of it, out of that, I got contacted by Janet a few months back, and the University of Indiana has an adapted fitness lab. And that lab wants to start working with us toward developing that connection, autism and movement, right? Because they're doing it, like Janet is doing a double PhD on the subject, neuroscience and movement. And so they saw that what we do potentially combining very well with what they do, which is exactly the case. So this December 3rd and 4th seminar will be a mix of things. Janet will be there, John Mack will be there, and then we'll be there with Mike. So we're all going to have a different idea. The point is to serve the autistic population, right? So what does that mean? That means, well, you need to have a gym set up a specific way. Again, we'll do a podcast on that. Your gym has to be set up, the coaching has to be toward a certain things. What type of exercise? Should exercise be different from the autistic population and others? What is the difference? Why? By the way, what is autism? All that will be covered roughly, obviously, at the seminar and things like that, but also like how to deal with this. Mike has so much practical experience. He's been doing that for so long, and he deals with that population firsthand. He's one of the very, very, very few in the US that deals with this firsthand from a movement perspective. And so his experience on this is precious. And he's going to share all that. And then, so we're going to establish the theory, but also the practical application of serving that population. Our idea with Mike for the center is obviously autism, but it's also anxiety because it's necessary. And in a way, it's also a key to the autistic population because Mike deals with a lot of kids, and dealing with kids means you need to deal with the parents. When the parents are not on the spectrum, it's very, very hard for them to understand what is happening with their kids. And we see a level of anxiety and honestly lack of support to those parents that is very that is heartbreaking.
And also like the struggle they have went through already with the school,
right?
With the school system,
they got tortured by the school system.
And that has a big impact on parents. Right?
And so we want to have centers where also like parents could bring and stay there for 2-3 weeks, you know, for the kid to make progress, because sometimes you need, you know, like time back to back for a certain amount of time to get the progress going. But also in that sense, it would allow us to serve the parents in that sense, and all the work we're doing toward anxiety, we could help the parents with as well as the kids, which I think is a synergy that cannot be, that people don't understand. I don't think people understand how necessary it is for the parents to deal, not to deal with the parents, but to help the parents as much as the kid, because they both feed off of each other energy. There's a synergy there that needs to be taken into account, and I really don't think it is, honestly. So that'll be also part of the centers we want to open with Mike, is that anxiety thing. And of course, it will serve people that have anxiety issues that are not on the spectrum, have nothing to do with autism, don't have kids on the spectrum or anything like that. But like, for example, out of the patients of Dr. Nasser that we train, 2 of them asked Mike if they could come back and keep training at his gym because they were so happy with the results. So that was cool. That is something we want to do as well, right? So that was the second part. And now the third part. So the third part is toward autism, and this one is a big one. And you're going to see which is interesting because all three are going to come together. So I went to San Francisco to meet with some people that are invested in the field of autism for a long time. The reason is because, for example, that lady that I met, Elizabeth, has a daughter on the spectrum. And those are high-level people. We're not talking people that are worth millions. We're talking people that are worth billions. With a B. It's a different type of people. But they are, as you can imagine, they're very, very, very connected everywhere. Right. And there is a change happening in the world of autism. It's slowly, surely, where we're looking at it less and less like a disease, like a disorder, but more and more as a misunderstood function, which is why, if you know me, I've been screaming about for a while now.
For a long time, actually.
Yeah, and then so the idea was to combine forces, and so I can't talk about it too much because it's not done yet, and I don't want to jinx it, and then I don't want to announce something that is not, on paper yet. But I'm going back there in a few weeks, and the idea would be like if I can prove that the system works, is we will start doing big things with that specific group. So she's leading the group, but it's a number of people, very, very high. They're in San Francisco, so tech people, you understand the money we're talking about, that are wanting to move the needle forward. And one of the ways we could do that is incorporate movement and autism. Everybody agrees that this is a problem for autism, is we don't know how to train the kids, they don't move enough, and the school system cannot handle any of it. So how do we do that? Exactly. Well, that would be the idea. And so one of the ways we could do that as well, so is to have a startup. There's going to be different things, but one of them would be to have a startup and use those goggles from Dr. Nasser toward that aspect as well. So again, I need to do a full podcast on that, but I will wait a little bit until I have more specific information. On one side, I don't want to jinx it, and on the other, I don't want to promise anything I'm not delivering yet. But the idea is I'm going back there in 2 weeks, and if I can show that the system works like through tests, right, like that I can actually generate the type of reaction that I said that I can through the system, then we would have access to a new world of technology and funding and influence that would allow us to move, I think, the needle of autism forward, at least in the field of movement, which is so important.
And so not done yet without.
Right, no. And so you can imagine what I would meet also for coaches that want to go into that field. All of you that have CrossFit gyms, most of you at least that I talk to, have always kids that come that need a specific type of help and things like this. So no matter what, in January, we will start a mentoring program with Mike toward helping people dealing with people on the spectrum, right? So what needs to be done. So that's starting in January no matter what. We have this December 3rd and 4th seminar in Bloomington, Indiana, that is free. The first one, the next ones will be, you'll have to pay, but this one is free, so you should go. And then we have all the stuff toward anxiety and then and Dr. Nasser, so everything is happening at once. This is going to be the direction Strongfit is going in. The world being what it is now, everything is slowing down in the fitness industry. And honestly, you know me, I've been working on this for a while. This is moving forward. So I can't last very long because of still the vestibular thing is, but I will take the next 2-3 minutes to explain a little bit where this is going. This is going to go forward. We're talking to very, very high level that are seeing the results in what I do. Turns out I was right about what I was saying, and now it can be proven, and those people are very interested. I would like to take some of you with me in that field. That will be the mentoring program. You don't have to believe me that I say it's working where I'm going. Some of you will not. Some of you will not be interested, but this is where I'm going. I'm hoping to take as many of you coaches with me as I can in creating a new field toward that autism, anxiety, PTSD, and so that we can start applying movement to those. You know, this has been something I've been passionate about for a while, and
working on for a long time.
Working on for a long time, and
trenches.
just because I didn't have the testing yet, did not mean I was wrong. I was actually right, and I'm proving it through all. We already have the numbers to show, but then as we do more studies, and then I'm working with very high level people in tech that can have all the testing imaginable, and some you don't know about, as you can imagine, and the universities like UCLA, the Adapted Fitness Lab in Indiana, like this is moving forward. This is going in a direction that it was always going to go toward.
Yes.
I would like to take as many of you as I can with me into what is, I think, is a new and very exciting field. We will have the mentoring program for that. Again, you don't have to believe me on this. Like, I know Strongfit has changed a lot in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. We lost Richard, unfortunately, of Strongfit. He's doing his own thing, which is great, but he's just not with me anymore. And I can tell, like, some people thought like Strongfit went a certain way. No, it didn't. Strongfit is exactly the way it was before. Just especially in today's world with between TikTok and stuff like that, people like celebrities. People seem to only follow celebrity and seems to be attracted to a specific type of marketing branding that I do not subscribe to.
No.
I will not do things a certain way to sell what I do, or I won't do the TikTok stuff. I won't do the short, very snappy stuff. I won't do that many shorts on YouTube. This is not a game I play. As usual, I'm going in the direction, and you will choose to follow me or you won't. On that one, I don't advise, I don't tell people what to do, and I don't advise often. On that one, I would tell you, this is going to go into a really good place and you should come with me. Out of that, you will do as you decide, as usual, and as you should, but I believe this one will go far and in a really cool direction. So I hope a lot of you will follow me there.
I hope so too.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.